Welcome to True Tales from the Other Side. If you have a true encounter with the unexplained that you want to share, contact us through the email address below. Enjoy.
I must have been about 9 years old when it happened. It was late summer, warm and sticky, but the nights were already starting to cool down, and that afternoon I'd gone out exploring. My family lived on the edge of a big patch of forest in rural Washington state near the mountains. My mom always told me not to wander too far, but that day I was feeling a little braver than usual. I'd walked deeper than normal, following a faint trail of my own making. I was always looking for new treasures, strange rocks, feathers, or the occasional animal footprint. After a while, I found this quiet little clearing surrounded by tall trees and ferns so thick they almost felt like walls. I sat there for a while, making patterns in the dirt with sticks, completely losing track of time. Suddenly I heard rustling in the bushes. I froze, expecting it to be a rabbit or maybe even a deer, but instead this low, throaty growl broke the silence. My heart skipped a beat when I looked up and saw the dark shape of a wolf stepping out from the shadows of the trees. It was huge, its for dark and ragged, teeth bared. I'd never seen a wolf in person before, and I remember feeling this strange mix of awe and absolute terror. I didn't know what to do. My mom had told me to stay still if I ever encountered a predator, but everything in me wanted to run. I was certain it would lunge at any second. Then, before I could even process what was happening, it happened so fast. The wolf's attention shifted, its growl turning into a yelp as it slunk back, retreating into the trees. I turned, and there it was, a towering figure, standing maybe 10 feet away. I'd heard stories from my older brother about Bigfoot, about the hairy man who lived in the woods, but I'd always thought he was just trying to scare me. But this was real. He was real. He was covered in thick, mad fur, this deep brown with hints of gray. His eyes were dark but kind, watching me with this calmness that made me feel safe. I was half his height, but he didn't seem threatening. In fact, he looked at me almost like an adult looking at a lost child, which I guess I was. We just stood there, me staring up at him watching me like he was waiting for me to decide what to do. After a moment he reached down to the forest floor and picked up a few sticks and leaves, and with this surprising gentleness he held them out to me. At first I didn't understand, but he crouched down and started twisting the sticks and twigs together, his large, rough hands working so delicately. In just a minute or two he'd made a doll out of twigs and leaves, a simple figure, but with a tiny head and arms. He held it out to me, and I took it without even thinking. It was beautiful, in a strange way, with pieces of moss tucked around its shoulders like a little shawl. I don't remember how long we stayed there, but he eventually rose, gave a little nod, and turned back into the woods. I was too stunned to say anything, not that I would have known what to say. He just melted into the shadows, moving quietly for someone so big, and then he was gone like he'd never been there at all. I was still clutching the little doll when I heard my mother's voice calling my name. She'd been out looking for me, worried that I'd wandered too far. I ran to her, breathless and babbling about what I'd just seen, showing her the twig doll. She gave me a strange look, but I don't think she believed me. Still, I kept that doll, carrying it home and putting it on my nightstand. The days went by, but I couldn't stop thinking about that moment. I went back to that clearing several times, but there was no sign of him. I began to think maybe I'd imagined it all, that the fear had somehow conjured him out of my imagination. But then one evening I found something else waiting for me at the edge of the woods, another doll, this one made of finer, carefully chosen twigs and bits of dried flower petals tucked into the hair. It became a routine. Every so often I'd go to the forest edge, and I'd find another doll waiting for me, each one more intricate than the last, some with tiny berries tied on as eyes, others with flowers or bits of moss for clothing. I never saw him again, but I knew he was out there watching, leaving these little gifts as reminders. Years went by, and we eventually moved to a new town. I brought the dolls with me, keeping them in a box under my bed. I didn't talk about him to anyone, not even my family. It was too strange, too personal, like a secret I wanted to keep safe. It wasn't until much later, as an adult, that I told the story to a close friend. She listened in awe and told me there were stories, legends, really about Bigfoot or similar creatures watching over the children of the forest, almost like guardians. Whether he was an animal, a spirit, or something else entirely, I don't know. But I do know that whatever he was, he had been there for me, watching over me, and leaving those small reminders of kindness in the form of twig and moss dolls. Sometimes, when I go hiking alone, I still look around half expecting to see a familiar figure among the trees, and I still keep those dolls in a small glass case on my bookshelf, a reminder of the protector I had. The Pacific Crest Trail had always been on my bucket list, something I'd dreamed of doing for years. I'd spent months planning, saving up, and training for the trek. It felt like one of those once-in-a-lifetime opportunities, something I had to do for myself, even if it meant going solo. It was late afternoon, and I'd been hiking for hours, weaving through dense pine forests with the sound of nothing but the wind and the crunch of my boots on the dry earth. That stretch was particularly isolated, far from any main trailhead or campsite, but I was enjoying the solitude and feeling like I had all of nature to myself. The sun was sinking lower in the sky, casting an orange and pink glow through the trees, so I started looking around for a good spot to set up camp. I'd just finished collecting some water from a nearby creek and was stowing my gear when I heard something behind me, a low, throaty growl. I froze, every sense on high alert, and turned slowly. Not even 20 feet away was a bobcat, crouched low with its eyes locked on me. It was bigger than I'd imagined, muscular and predatory, its eyes reflecting the dying light like tiny menacing embers. I was alone, armed with nothing but a hiking stick, and though I knew bobcats rarely attack people, I backed up slowly, keeping my eyes on it, but the cat took a step forward, muscles tensed, ready to pounce. My heart was racing, and my mind was scrambling, trying to remember everything I'd read about what to do in situations like this, but panic was making it all a blur. Just as the bobcat was about to lunge, a sudden guttural roar, this deep, booming sound that shook the ground and seemed to come from all directions. I turned toward the noise and saw something incredible. Emerging from the trees was a figure, massive and covered in thick, dark brown hair. He was enormous, easily 7 or 8 feet tall, with broad shoulders and an aura of strength that dwarfed everything around him. I knew instantly what I was looking at. I mean, you can't mistake something like that. It was a Bigfoot. He let out another bellowing growl, louder and more commanding than anything I'd ever heard, and the bobcat flattened its ears, clearly spooked. Without a second thought the cat bolted, darting back into the underbrush, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as it had come. For a moment it was just the two of us, the towering figure, and me standing there in the fading light, both of us silent. He looked at me with these deep-set eyes, dark but kind, almost like he was making sure I was okay. I was too shocked to move, to speak. The stories I'd heard over the years, the documentaries, the sightings, all of it felt so distant and unreal until that moment. I remember thinking how strange it was that I wasn't afraid. His presence was intense, but there was this calmness to him. He stood there watching me, and I had the distinct feeling that he wanted me to understand I was safe. After a few moments he turned and melted back into the shadows of the forest. His movements were incredibly quiet, almost graceful, especially for someone of his size. He didn't look back, just disappeared into the trees, leaving me standing there, heart racing, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. I stayed put for a while, just staring into the forest, half expecting to see him again. But he was gone like he'd only been there for that one purpose, to protect me in that moment. I don't know how long I stood there before I managed to gather my things and find a spot to set up camp, not far from where I'd seen him. That night I lay awake in my tent, replaying the encounter in my mind, but every time I tried to rationalize it, the memory of his eyes, the power of his presence, felt undeniable. After that day I kept going on the trail, but I felt different, like I wasn't alone out there. The vastness of the wilderness seemed less intimidating, less empty. Every time I'd hear a branch snap or catch a glimpse of movement in the trees, I'd wonder if he was still out there watching over me. People ask me sometimes if I got lonely on that hike, and I tell them I didn't, not after that day. I tell them I had a guardian out there, a massive, gentle protector who came out of the woods when I needed him most. And every time I think back to that encounter, I feel a strange, quiet gratitude for the mystery of the wilderness and for whatever it was that chose to watch over me on that trail.
Thanks for listening. Remember to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next set of tales from the other side. Submit your story to the email below. And remember, nothing is what it seems.